GOP presidential hopeful Vivek Ramaswamy went off on a Washington Post reporter yesterday after she said that he failed to condemn white supremacy. Let's watch.
You didn't say that you condemn white supremacy.
I'm not going to recite some catechism for you. I'm against vicious racial discrimination in this country. So I'm not pledging allegiance to your new religion of modern wokeism, which absolutely fits the test. I'm not going to bend the knee to your religion. I'm sorry. I'm not asking you to bend the knee to mine, and I'm not going to bend the knee to yours. But do I condemn vicious racial discrimination? Yes, I do. Am I going to play your silly game of gotcha? No, I'm not. And frankly, this is why people have lost trust. And I know you're going to go print the headline tomorrow. I already know this. We already know how your game works. Vivek Ramaswamy refuses to condemn white supremacy because you asked a stupid question. The reality is, I condemn vicious racial discrimination in this country, but the kind of vicious and systematic racial discrimination we see today is discrimination on the basis of race in a very different direction.
Conservatives were quick to praise Vivek for hitting back against the journalist. One user posted, "WAPO reporter doubles down. You didn't say that you condemn white supremacy," though she immediately regrets it. Vivek Ramaswamy isn't going to play the game, to which Ramaswamy responded, "This is the stupidest question I've gotten yet from the media, and that says a lot."
But not everyone was impressed with Ramaswamy. I posted yesterday, in fact, that it's difficult to deny that Vivek Ramaswamy, in that very clip, refused to condemn white supremacy. He goes on to say in the clip, which we just listened to, that he does condemn vicious and systemic racism, but the kind of vicious and systemic racism we see today is discrimination on the basis of race in a very different direction. So it seems clear there to me, Robby, that he says, yes, I condemn racism, but if you look more closely and listen to what he says it's the vicious and racism that goes in the other direction. And am I wrong? What can you take from that other than he can say, yes, racism is bad, when it's anti-white racism, the racism that's often evoked when people are talking about diversity initiatives or the kind of initiatives that are aimed at creating inequality after hundreds of years of legal de jure segregation and inequality in the United States of America.
Right. So I similarly, like him, oppose many mandatory diversity measures and affirmative action and race-based admissions, those kinds of things. So I don't have any issue there, but you can also just say, yes, I also oppose white supremacy, and I don't know why that wouldn't be the
and it's worth noting, I think there's some important context here. I can appreciate that if you randomly asked someone, do you condemn racism? It feels like one of those, don't you, when's the last time you beat your wife questions. But he was getting this line of questioning after he got an endorsement from Steve King. Now, Steve King of Iowa very famously got in hot water now, what was that, a few years ago, maybe in 2019, 2020 cycle, when he was asked about white supremacy. And he equivocated saying, well, what is a white nationalist? First of all, I think you have to be white, but then we've got Rachel Dolezal, who didn't have to be black. And and defending, he says in 2019, white nationalists, white supremacists, Western civilization. How did that language become offensive?
Yeah, that was the real bad thing that he said.
So I mean, if you are accepting an endorsement, like many people, I remember people like John McCain rejected the endorsement of that David Duke, but also that Christian Zionist who was invited to speak at the Israeli march on the lawn about a month ago. There are principled conservatives over time who have rejected the endorsements of some of the more radical fringe and right-wing aspects of their own coalition.
Well, the entire Republican Party rejected Stephen King. Frankly, Steve King, they stripped him of his committee assignments based on those remarks.
So how do we get from that in 2019 to saying that it is irresponsible for a journalist to ask whether or not someone who gets Steve King's endorsement rejects his ideology? And why is Vivek Ramaswamy treating that as such an impossible question when it seems to me it would be very easy to say, you can shame the reporter by saying, ma'am, of course I reject white supremacy, and it is shameful that you have to ask that. But more importantly, I think that DEI is the real horror here, and you can go on and say whatever you want to say. And so I think that moments like this, I know that the internet and probably us are going to name this, he owns the press, he dunks on the press, but he is now not going to be at the next debate because he insists that moments like this that get him clicks on the internet and plaudits from very online folks do not play well in the normal world where most normal people say, hey, it's pretty reasonable to be asked if you actually agree with one of the most notorious racists in Congress in recent memory who just gave you an endorsement.
Well, I don't know that most normal people care very much one way or the other. I mean, this is a very kind of insular debate. I don't know that most normal people would take issue with the idea that would fault him for saying, I oppose systematic racial discrimination, and I'm sick of the media for harping on this. Now, he did tweet, I think I mentioned this yesterday, in favor of, in the same tweet, but this is very textbook Vivek, Ron Paul, who I think is great, and Steve King, who I don't have any particular affection for, and agree that he said a lot of bad things and was rightly held accountable for them. So I don't think Steve King endorsing him means he really had to do anything, but then he also went out of his way to praise Steve King. So you're going to get asked a question there. Now, of course, attacking the media and assailing the media is the number one thing you can do to make yourself beloved of that online conservative base. It's clearly not really helping him in the poll numbers, but again, his goal is just to delegitimize Trump's opponents to the best of his ability. Yes, if I were him, I would have just said, yes, I oppose white supremacy and any other kind of racial-based supremacy, and racism is bad, and we shouldn't have racism by law in our system of government. And in fact, racism is enshrined in admissions and yada, yada, yada.
You can include... you can include that you believe that anti-white racism is a real problem, among other kinds of racism.
And anti-Asian racism is what I would harp on.
Well, that doesn't seem to be what he was, I don't know, who knows what he meant by that. But that's not just what he said. I would disagree with that, frankly. But he didn't just say, I include anti-white racism among all the other kinds of racism that are a problem. He said, no, the real racism, what is it? Let me quote myself again.
He could have said, I condemn white supremacy. Do you condemn Harvard's admissions policies to the reporter? That's what I would have said.
He said, I condemn vicious and systematic racism, but the kind of vicious and systematic racism we see today, and implicitly that he condemns, is discrimination on the basis of race in a very different direction. That part of the quote implies that he actually does not believe that anti-Black, Asian, Hispanic, whatever racism doesn't actually exist. He says the kind of vicious and systemic racism we see today is discrimination on the basis of race in a very different direction. He didn't say inclusive of anti-Black, anti-Asian racism. We also have these other kinds of racism the other way.
I very much think what he meant by that was affirmative action and those kinds of things.
Right. I know what he meant by it, Robby. Yeah. But like I'm saying, you can say that I think that's a problem, inclusive with all the other kinds of racism, but he didn't say that. And I think this is the worst part of the quote that people aren't picking up on. He said, yes, I'm anti-racist, but the kind of racism that we're seeing today is in the other direction, which is implicitly saying that the typical kind of historical racism doesn't exist anymore, and that the kind of anti-racism that he objects to is not anti-Black or anti-Asian or anti-Hispanic, but is exclusively anti-white.
The conservative view, and you will disagree with this, but this is the conservative view, is that the kind of baked into our actual system and institutions by law or by policy at institutions, that kind of racism is predominantly against white and Asian people. There's still racist sentiment toward Black people, immigrants, et cetera, like throughout the country, but the kind of systemic racism is largely against white and Asian people.
Yeah,
that's the view.
I know that's what he believes. He believes...
And that's what he was saying.
I don't even know that he would acknowledge, maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, that there is racism generally in the country. I don't know how you could acknowledge that there's racism out and among individuals, but those individuals who are holding positions of power disproportionately in the United States of America never have the effect of influencing hiring decisions, criminal sentencing penalties, all of the ways that we know from years and years of empirical research. Black, Hispanic, Native Americans, and others are disproportionately incarcerated for longer sentences for the same crime in our criminal justice system, are sentenced to the death penalty for the same crime in our criminal justice system, and on and on and on. That if you have a name that is identified as Black, that you're discriminated against in our in our hiring system, that Asian Americans are discriminated against for senior leadership positions, and on and on and on. So that, to me, doesn't make sense in and of itself. But even granting that you think that the real problem, or that a significant problem, is what's going on with affirmative action or DEI, he could make that point without seeming to exclude other kinds of discrimination from being something that he wants to condemn.
So again, the conservative position would be that, well, yes, there is still racial discrimination that takes place against black applicants for jobs or something like that. But in many cases where that happens, again, I'm just telling you what the position of the right is that there's a civil rights investigation, the Justice Department will swoop in, there will be, the system will condemn it because it's against the law, it violates our civil rights law. But if there is, but racism against, again, white and Asian people is actually, nothing is done about that
well, because
it doesn't violate the law. It's in fact required by the laws, and it took a recent Supreme Court decision to halt it.
You're now conflating EEOC claims with affirmative action. Asian people are a protected class, and they can bring EEOC claims, and they are absolutely victims of discrimination in the workplace, and they have the right to pursue those claims. Asian people and white people are not like buddies in this. Asian people have been exploited in the affirmative action case by people like Christopher Rufo, who this is not conspiracy. He openly announces his plans on these things. But Asian people suffer employment discrimination in a very real way at all levels of employment in numerous sectors.
Briahna, they suffer educational opportunity.
And they can sue under the EEOC. But the question is, now I have to say this, people who believe that EEOC claims are a panacea should do some research. It is incredibly difficult to prove discrimination absent your boss saying, I hate Asian people, I hate black people, and I'm not going to give you that job. That's not how it works. And that's why we came up with it. That's why sociologists came up with this word of systemic racism, because the reality is that you can see things across demographic trends that often aren't provable on a case-by-case basis, because in contemporary society, most people know not to announce their prejudice like that. So as a lawyer, as a clerk, as a federal district clerk in New York, I did see these claims, and I saw how absolutely impossible it was for any of them to be successful. You can read innuendo into a lot of the things that are happening here. You can struggle to understand, you can struggle to, justify why a certain person wouldn't be getting a certain promotion and things like that. But absent this, the standards are actually extremely high. And so acting as though, black people and Asian people, whomever, have it really easy in this world because they can just bring a claim, I don't know, that's deeply naive.
Again, the conservative position, though, is that it's by explicit policy what Asian and white people face, that they'll stop counting test results if too many Asian people are in the exceptional category, that they'll reject the education system, that they will put in an explicit quota, that, again, what Harvard was exposed to do with those people is so appalling and took a Supreme Court
I'm so glad
order.
that's over, and and it's going to be really interesting to see, like when this happened in California, how dramatically the white enrollment rates dip. When there's no more quotas on Asian,
if it's 100% Asian people,
Asian
doesn't matter to me.
And how little, frankly, because other groups already comprise so little of the college participation anyway.
If every campus in the country is 100% Asian, it does not matter to me. It should just be the most qualified people.
Yeah. I entirely agree, and that's why the 30% of Harvard that are legacy admissions are implicated more pointedly in this. What we're actually going to see is that it's going to be 70% Asian and 30% people whose mommy and daddy went to Harvard. So success there. We're rising for you right after this.